This is the Veteran Woman Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to empowering, inspiring, and encouraging veteran women to overcome their struggles and celebrate their successes. Now, here's your host, the one and only Ariel Renal.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Veteran Woman Podcast. I am your host, Ariel Renal, and today I have Roberto Candelaria. Did I say that right? I was trying to roll my R's.
It is good. It is good. It is perfect.
So before we get started, I want to give a quick backstory on how I met Roberto. Some of you know about the infamous road trip I took with April Franks Hunt back in March to Texas. So I drove from Kansas. April is in Oklahoma City. We stopped in Dallas to drop off something for the EPIC conference that was held in March. And then we drove to Austin, Texas for her to support some friends of hers that were having a summit, social media summit. And April had heard about Roberto, and so many people were like, you need to meet Roberto. You need to meet Roberto. So I had the honor of meeting Roberto when April did. And I'm telling you, if you don't know about that trip, you got to look back at some of the archived videos and Facebook Lives and typed outs and everything. But I'm so honored to have Roberto on my podcast. He said yes. So honored. Roberto is an expert in getting sponsorships, helping people fund their dreams with other people's money. I hope I got that right. It's something like that, something that I really love. And he can talk to you about that. He can talk to you about his upbringing. He can talk to you about his family who have served. So I'll let Roberto take it wherever he wants to.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you for the work that you do. As you mentioned, my family has served, so thank you for your service. Thank you to your listeners for their service. Although I personally never felt the call to join the armed forces, I kind of liked I liked the air conditioning and 5-star restaurants over MREs for some reason. I don't know why.
I agree.
Now, I've heard about, being able to church up some ramen noodles or some MREs, but it's just it's never been my thing. So, but for all of you, thank you for your service. I know that's something you probably do not get to hear nearly enough. And as someone who has had my grandfather and uncles, including my own father and brother-in-law, serve our country, thank you so much for that. And I am so glad to be here today. As mentioned, what I do is I help people fund their dreams with other people's money. And whether you're a for-profit or a nonprofit, or if you're looking for a way to find profit, because I don't know about y'all, but when I first started in business, I became an accidental nonprofit just because I wasn't charging people. I didn't know to charge, or I should say I didn't know how to charge, because I was charging prices that, some things I was losing money on, but I was like, but I got a customer. And it's like, don't matter if you got a customer if you're losing money on it. One of the things about people who serve, whether it be serving our country, whether it be serving our families, whether it be serving in churches, or even serving as educators, people who serve, they're always looking for ways to serve, and then sometimes forget that there's this balance between how do we serve, but then how do we also make sure that we're serving in a way that makes sure that we don't get a pink envelope from the insurance company or the electric company. And that's why I love sponsorship. But that's not how I got into sponsorship. I got into sponsorship my sophomore year of high school. Our choir had the opportunity to perform at Walt Disney World. And if y'all follow me on social media, I'm Roberto Teaches everywhere. Don't put everywhere. It's just at Roberto Teaches. But that is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You'll find me there. Our sophomore year of high school, we had the opportunity to go perform at Disney. And, all I knew was that we had to sell a bunch of the world's finest chocolate, which is not the world's finest chocolate. And we got 25 cents per candy bar to our account. And for any of you that have had anyone that's had to go out and sell wrapping paper or sell magazines or go sell them Girl Scout cookies or go sell the Boy Scouts popcorn or so any of that, what you know is the only person making the money is not your kid's account. And then you're just like, at the end of the day, you end up writing a check to fund the difference of it. And I was just like, this is ridiculous. So I started talking to small business owners in the Austin, Texas area about, hey, we're doing this thing. We're going to Disney. If we did a concert, could y'all help sponsor? And I didn't even know it was called sponsoring at the time. I knew that I wanted to go to Disney, and I knew that they had money, and I knew they paid money to the sports teams. Why couldn't they do it for the arts? And that is what started this journey to now working with over $18 million in funding. And I say that because every one of us has a start of a journey, and that journey just didn't happen overnight. It wasn't like, bam, 18 million. It was like, no, you suck. No, here's $100. No, here's $500. No, here's $250. And I was like, man, I'm going the wrong way here. The numbers are going down. But then they finally started adding up, and the numbers got much bigger. And so I'm here to say that the reason that I'm here and the reason that I am so passionate about sponsorship is a conversation that my dad and I had early in my career. My dad was in the Air Force, and after leaving the Air Force, he went to work for IBM, and then from there he retired from the IRS. And there was a time in business that I was thinking about giving up because I was just so frustrated. And my dad said, the only difference between me and you, son, is that I've heard a lot more no's than you. And that is something that sits true to this day, because I tell you, the only reason you're listening to this podcast with me talking about sponsorship as opposed to you or anybody else is that I've heard a lot more no's than you. And so I'm here for whatever questions you might have. I'd love to answer and make sure that we best serve your community in the time that we have together today. Wow.
I love how you not only just talked about sponsorships, but you talked about being an entrepreneur all the way around, because that's what it takes to get to success, whatever or however you define success. You have to hear those no's. It's just a part of the business. It's one of the things you have to do. And the more no's you hear, that means the more you're trying, the more you're persevering, and the more you're working. And don't give up, because you're going to get to that yes. And then next thing you know it, you're a 10-year overnight success. But nothing comes easy. You definitely have to work for it. And knowing your reason why, because you can hear, I love how you told the story of back when you were younger and how that fueled your passion for what you do now. And that's something that we always have to remember whenever we give up or get ready to give up, because it's that thing that helps us move on.
And speaking of fueling the passion, one of the things that I remember, I try to every day, I like to say that I do it every day, but there's some days I do better jobs than others, is, what my parents, what my grandparents did to make it possible for me to have the journey that I have now. So, in our own one-on-one conversations, we've talked about how my grandfather retired from Army Air Corps, and I've got an uncle who retired from the Marines. I've got cousins who are still in the Army, brother-in-law in the Army. And so when I look back, I get to do what I do because of the freedom that these men and women fought for, but also because even in their own journeys, they always push the limits to say, how do I make it better for the next generation? And I think that that's something that very important that we need to do in business as well. And, one of the things I just want to throw in here right now, because I'm noticing kind of where you're taking me and we're talking a lot about the family side and the business side, which is awesome. So I don't know, ladies and gentlemen, where we're going to end up on the rest of this episode.
I don't either.
But what I will say is I do want to make sure that you get some amazing, amazing sponsorship training. So if you at any point later when you're done listening to this, head over to sponsor101.com. That's sponsor, sponsor101.com. And there's a free 5-day e-course there. It's, once again, absolutely free. And that way we can make sure that we serve you with the information that you're looking for on sponsorship. So what other questions do you have for me?
Oh, wow. Like so many. So can you dispel some of the myths that come with sponsorship? Because I know when I think of sponsorship, I'm like, whoa, it's overwhelming. And sometimes I'll think, well, I'm not big enough, or I haven't been in business long enough, or how do I approach people about it? So what are some of the myths and what are some of the tips that you have?
Oh, absolutely. So, I think one of the biggest myths in sponsorship is that you have to be a nonprofit to get sponsored.
Yes, that is a big one.
It's a huge one. And things that I think that's important here is to realize that, like, you're not a nonprofit. I'm not a nonprofit. Now, there may have been times in our journey, I'll tell you flat out, there was times in my journey where I was a nonprofit, but I didn't have the tax break. It's just because I was just, I messed up in business.
Right.
And so it's not about the nonprofit or the for-profit status, because the only real difference there is a tax designation. Kobe Bryant, when he was getting all of his big sponsorship paying for the Lakers, you know what? He wasn't out there, as a nonprofit getting sponsored. That man is not a nonprofit. He is making money. When you look at, any of these big athletes, when you look at people that hold events and hold conferences, most of the conferences that we go to are not nonprofits. And, and so sponsorship is not just for nonprofits. It's about making sure that you have something that is, number one, legal. And then number two, hey, legal is an important one, but something that somebody can see value in. A couple of the other biggest myths are that, let's say, I'm trying to pick some of my favorite ones. There's just so many, and they're not even myths. They're just lies. Like, people just tell lies. I would say that the next one would be is that there's no money for a first-time property. And to give you a little bit of sponsorship language, the property just means anything that you're having sponsored. So whether that's your book, whether that's your event, whether that's your podcast, whether it's your gala event, whatever it is, whatever you're having sponsored is the property. And so there's this big myth out there and lie out there that there's no money for the first time I do something. Well, I'm going to tell you what, everybody's got a first time. There's a first time for everything. There's the first kiss. There's the first time you rode a bike. There's the first time your cousin pushed you in the pool and you learned how to swim. There is always a first time, and there is money for first-time properties. It's just knowing how you present yourself to say, hey, this is the value that I can give, and this is how I deserve to be compensated for that. Mm-hmm. I'd say another myth is that that there's just no money. Roberto, there's no money for sponsorship. Well, no, there's just no money in your bank account, maybe because you haven't got sponsored. But there are billions, and I say that, billions with a B, out there in sponsorship. We're looking at about $23 billion in North America and about $62 billion globally. And like I said, that's with a B, not an M. And that's so important because what that's saying is that as sponsorship has been on the rise the past few years, what we're seeing is that these brands aren't just, looking at traditional media anymore as the only way to go. If any of you, get a phone book that's got a certain color pages, you probably notice that book's not as thick as it used to be. A
lot of people don't know what a phone book is.
I know.
Especially printed phone book.
I know, right? And it's so good that you say that, because I feel bad for the people that are still trying to sell ads for this phone book.
Yes.
And people are like, what? Like, I don't even know the last time I saw one. But it's not just that book. It is, one of my favorite things growing up as a kid was every weekend my mom and I would go down to this gas station by this place that we lived in Houston, and we'd get the Sunday paper. And I mean, I'm talking about like when the Sunday paper in Houston was, I mean, a good 3 to 4 inches thick, maybe 3.5, because of all the ads and all the circulars. And it was just like we were going to dig them out. We were going to find all the coupons and we were going to cut them out. We were going to go shopping. It just kind of became a game. And now I see the newspaper and it's just like, oh, where's the rest? I get.
Did somebody take the ads out already?
Right. But see that these brands just aren't doing that. If you think about the magazines that you saw or still see over at the grocery store and newsstands, they're not as thick as they used to be. Mm-hmm. Why? Less people are advertising in there. It's not that they changed the content model. There's just not as many ads because traditional media is dying, and it's dying very fast, and it's been dying for years. But we're seeing it even more so right now as more and more apps are created and more online digital platforms are created. The traditional media is dying even faster. So these brands are looking for a way for this money that they already had allocated to say, okay, how do we get a return on investment? And that's why sponsorship has been on the rise for such a long time now.
So it sounds like you're saying it's not only like a sponsorship budget, but a marketing budget as well that the companies would be working off of, because it's another way to market themselves.
Oh, absolutely. And, most larger brands, the sponsorship budget is part of a marketing and advertising budget. And it's just kind of a line item within that larger, bigger budget.
Mm-hmm. So we were talking about sponsorship. Can you define sponsorship and tell us the difference between getting sponsors and getting donations?
Oh, absolutely. So, to me, the definition, I mean, there's all these fancy dictionary definitions and I don't really do them.
Yeah. Break it down for us in everyday terms.
My definition of sponsorship is having somebody that sees value in what you do and being able to give you either cash or a product or a service or some sort of in-kind thing in exchange for the value that they'll get to help them reach their business goals. And that's to me what it is. And that's why I say fund your dreams with other people's money, because it is the more we help people get what they want, the more that we get what we want. And in this case, it just happens to be sponsorships checks. And I forgot the second part of your question.
Donations. So how does that differ
donations,
from getting donations? Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So this one's easy. So let's say that, that somebody was having a conference and there was somebody that wanted to give you, I don't know, name like a store and a restaurant that you like.
Walmart.
Okay, so Walmart and a restaurant.
Olive Garden.
Olive Garden. Okay, so we got Walmart and Olive Garden. So if Walmart came up to you and said, hey, I know you're doing this amazing conference for vets, and we really like what you're doing. We want to give you, $1,000 gift card so you can go get whatever you need at the store to be able to get, whatever for this conference, because we love what you're doing with supporting vets. Here you go. And if Olive Garden said, oh my gosh, you're doing this lunch for these people, and we're going to feed all of these people just to thank them for their service. Both of those are examples of donations. Now, if Walmart and Olive Garden came back and said, okay, now for feeding all of these people and for giving you this $1,000 gift card, what we want is ABC. So we want to have our logo there. We want to know that you can be putting this out on social media. We want to be on the website. We want 5 minutes of stage time or 10 minutes of stage time. That then makes it a sponsorship, because the big difference is the thing that we get, whether it be a donation or a sponsorship, could be exactly the same. What differs the sponsorship and the donation is with the sponsorship, there's an agreement, a legal agreement, or a document that says, hey, when you give me this, whatever this is, these are all the things that I'm going to give you back in return for this. Where donation's a group pretty much, giving you something and patting you on the back and saying, good job, keep it up. I really like what you're doing. But you can do those exact same things for them. You just don't have the legal liability to do those things for them as part of an agreement.
Got it. That is a very thin line. And thank you for explaining that and making that clearer, because Even when you were explaining it, I was like, okay, this still sounds alike. But like you said, it's that what you're giving back to that person that makes them a sponsor versus the donation is just here. And it can even be anonymous.
Yes.
And they're not wanting anything in return, or they're not getting anything in return other than serving that cause or that event or that mission or those people.
Yeah. One is, hey, I have a business goal to reach. And the other is like, man, I really love what you're doing. Keep it up.
Mm-hmm. So how do you find people that are willing to sponsor?
Well, I think that the very first part of it, and this is where I think a lot of people make mistakes in sponsorship, is they start with okay, who am I getting sponsored by, without even knowing what it is that they want to have sponsored. And so for me, I think it's important to not necessarily start with the who or where am I going to find them, but start with what am I going to have sponsored. And that once we know what that we want to have sponsored, and, like I said, if y'all get a chance, go over to sponsor101.com so you can get that free e-course. And we talk about some of the different things that you can have sponsored. But, you could have a book sponsored, a book tour sponsored. You could have workshops sponsored, training sessions sponsored, food sponsored, your venue spaces sponsored. I've seen people have products sponsored. I've seen people have their keynote speaking sponsored. I've seen women have their dresses and their makeup and their shoes sponsored. And so it's starting with, what is it that we're getting sponsored? Then what do we have to offer a sponsor? And then based off what we have to offer, who would be interested in what we have to offer and the people that are coming to this thing or that will be involved in this thing that we're having sponsored? And I think that that's why there's such this disconnect with people not being able to, they say, well, I keep hearing too many no's. It's not that what they're doing is not worth being sponsored. It's that it's not yet clearly defined, so that if they're not clear on it themselves and then they go to a sponsor, the sponsor's like, I am so lost right now. All I know is that you asking me for a check, but I don't know for what. And so I think it's important to get clear on what's being sponsored first. And I find that that's also very true in our businesses as well, that we have to be very clear as to what our business is and who we serve. And so, one of the things I know about the military is that, no matter what branch you're in, you know who your commanding officer is. You know the chain of the command. If they give you orders, you know those orders, and you know who you need to be able to connect with to make those things happen. And most times, depending on what the job is, there's also backup plans, and there's the contingencies for, okay, we're supposed to do A, B, C, but if between B and C, oh crap happens, then we go to plan B.2.
Right.
But business owners don't take the time to create that in their own business. And so I think it's incredibly important, and even in our own business, to be very clear about who we serve and how we serve them and why we serve them, because we can't serve everybody. And I'll tell you, that was a lesson for me when I started my business. It was very hard to hear and very hard to know, because I'm like, I just want to help everybody. And it's like, well, I can help everybody, but not everybody can pay me. So the people that I really wanted to help were the people that couldn't pay me. And then that's when I was just like, man, I need a sponsor. And thankfully I knew the skill set, so I was able to do it. And that's one of the reasons I'm able to work with so many people that wouldn't be able to afford our brand otherwise, is because we have sponsors. And so to me, that's the power of sponsorship. It allows you to increase your impact, your influence, and your income while still serving the people that you want to serve, how you want to serve them. Because you have a sponsor, you're not worried about how the bills are going to be paid.
Love it. Love it. And I mean, as being an entrepreneur, that is definitely one of the struggles. Like you said earlier, you are a nonprofit just by happenstance, because you either messed up, didn't know how to ask for the money, or didn't know what to charge. And I know a lot of us go through that as entrepreneurs starting out, is that we're afraid to seem or sound greedy or salesy or whatnot. But we have to remember, we have to feed ourselves. And if we don't have a roof over our heads or electricity or the internet or food, then we can't reach the people who we need to reach.
Yeah, we can't reach and serve people if we're worried about how we're going to survive. It's a lot easier to help people when you're not worried about how the light bill is going to be paid. It's a lot easier to help people when you're not worried about, okay, am I going to be able to pay my rent this month? I have a friend who lives in San Antonio who is a retired Marine, and just recently experienced some, for lack of better words, we'll call it identity theft, where somehow his retirement and disability check wasn't on his account on May 1st. And so he freaking out at first, oh my gosh, the whole budget thing, Congress didn't pass this. Am I going to just freaking out, right? But then when we went down to the VA, it turns out that somehow his routing number and whatever got changed is going to somebody else's account now. And the VA don't want to change it back. So he's dealing with, his local congressman and all this type of stuff to try to get it back, because the VA is saying, well, our policy is that if we don't do this way, then, we can't change the direct deposit. And he's like, but you had no problem changing it when it wasn't me.
Right.
But thankfully, this man who served our country, who lost a limb for our country in battle, has other revenue streams outside of his disability, outside of his retirement, because if he didn't, it would be an oh crap moment. And so it's very important that as entrepreneurs, I have a few clients who are veterans, and one of the things I say is, don't get comfortable with that check. I want you to pretend that when growing your business, that check does not exist, especially when you got people that are retired, chief warrant officers and all these other things. Another person who served for 34 years, and you serve for 34 years, you get some good rank. That's a decent check.
Right.
But I want y'all to pretend sometimes okay, that check don't exist. If I didn't have this coming in, how would I be running my business?
Totally different.
You'd be more hungry.
Yeah.
And which means that we'd be hustling another way. And I still do that to this day in my business, whether I'm growing my business, whether we're getting sponsors. For me, it's, okay, if oh crap happened to me today, I don't have a government pension. I don't have a retirement check. I wasn't a vet. I didn't work for a major corporation for more than 3 months, and they don't give you retirement benefits for 3 months. There is no pension. And so I know, okay, if I'm not building this up, if I'm not working, if I'm not getting sponsored, there's not money coming in. And so for me, it's a catch-22, in that it's an extreme blessing to be able to have this retirement, to have the disability checks, not to have a disability, right? But to have the income to be able to say, okay, let's take time to focus and get this business going. At the same time, I find that for some people, it's also a crutch, because they know this is coming in, so they go about the business, or they go about sponsorship, or they're a nonprofit a different way, knowing that on the first of every single month, that check is going to be there. But what happens if it isn't? Like this friend who's a retired Marine, that just happened. Now, thankfully, he's got another business and he got money coming in there. So he's like, okay, I'm good for a few months, right? There's other stuff coming in. So if it takes him a few months to clear it up, I'm good. But most people, if that check didn't come, there's how am I going to pay rent? How am I going to pay the lights? How am I going to pay the car note? How am I going to put food on the table? And that, to me, is the importance of being able to start to build your brand, whether it's a for-profit or nonprofit, and get sponsored, because that's what allows us to know that, okay, you know what? I got a $20,000 sponsor. I got a $50,000 sponsor. How many people are making a $50,000 retirement check? Not many that I know of. Now, by the time you put on benefits and all of that, yeah.
Right.
But the benefits don't show up in your bank account every month. That's something you got to go to, and then occasionally you got to pay a copay if there ain't no TRICARE around you. And so it's important to build that business, build that brand, and realize that whatever message it is, whether, like I said, for profit or nonprofit, whatever it is you have going on, you are the only one put here on this earth to be able to deliver that message in a way that only you can deliver it for the people that were intended to hear that message from you. And to me, that's the power of sponsorship, is being able to fund these dreams, being able to fund your book tours, being able to fund your events, being able to hire coaches to build and grow your business to the level that you wanted to later this year because of sponsorship. Now, notice I said because of. My family, mom, dad, sister, niece, brother-in-law, like we're all going to Disney for a week because of sponsorship. Now, notice I didn't say that the trip was paid for by sponsors,
right?
But what sponsors pay, when you get sponsored, they don't pay the cost that it actually cost you to get something. They pay for the value of what it's worth to them, and that's called profit. Because if you go out and if you're an author, right, and you know that your book cost on average, if it's just a black and white book, less than about 200 pages, you know that it costs you about $279 to $350 if you do it through CreateSpace. But you don't run around selling that book for $2.79. No, you're selling it for $10, $20, $25, and you're making a profit. And it's the exact same thing with sponsorship. Just like you use that profit from that book to feed your bills, I use profit from sponsorship to be able to take my family to Disney.
Wow. So how do you ask for sponsorships for a brand or for something that we're not normally used to? Because I know we see sponsors at events, but as a brand, I guess that's what it's like unfathomable for me. Like, how would you do that? How do you go about doing that?
Well, the first thing is being very clear on what the brand is. And this is for everybody. And so like for me, my parent company is Candelaria and Associates, but most people don't even know that that's the parent company. I'm also part of another brand, which is called Algorithms for Success, but most people don't even know that name. My brand is me, Roberto Candelaria. But when a brand sponsors me, the way that they get value and the way that they get exposure and the way that they get their benefit, because they get it through my book, Relationships Raise Money. They get it through the online course, the Sponsorship Roadmap. We do specialty masterclasses called Sponsorship Masterclass. We're going to be launching a new course later this year called Sponsor 101. They know that they can get exposure through our live events, our one-day event sponsorship crash course, and our 3-day events sponsorship boot camp. And so the brand becomes very clear as what we do is we help people fund their dreams with other people's money. Who is it that we serve? We serve entrepreneurs, nonprofits. And even within that, more specifically, we serve authors, speakers, coaches, and event producers. And when we're very clear about what the brand is and who we serve, it's clearer to figure out what brand wants access to those people. And then when we have a clear definition of the business and how we serve our people, we can then offer those things as benefits to the people that are sponsoring us. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
It did to me.
Well, you've been doing this a lot longer. Okay. So is it better to do, so like for instance, with the Veteran Woman platform, I have my coaching, my one-on-one coaching that I offer. I have the podcast, I have the event, and I have my network. So like my mastermind group. So is it better to approach the sponsor and say, like, I want you to sponsor my podcast, and this is the value that you get from it. And, I can give you a shout out. Is it better to focus on those specific things, or like the Veteran Woman as a whole saying that I serve women veterans? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, no, so the latter is exactly what I was explaining. So I would be looking at, okay, hey, we're looking at getting the Veteran Woman sponsored. And when you sponsor the Veteran Woman, one of the ways that you can get exposure is through a live event. Another way that you can get exposure is through our podcast. And so that the advertising on the podcast becomes one of the benefits of them working with the brand overall. Because then they have these things that they can pick and choose from as to where and how they want to be able to sponsor.
Love it. And thank you for that free coaching.
Hey, it's the benefit of being a podcast host.
But I love that. And honestly, that was a question because it was about as clear as mud. But now it's very clear to me. And I love that. And I didn't even think of it that way. You do the brand as a whole, and the different aspects are tenets of the brand they can pick and choose from. Love it, love it, love it. So that makes it even more powerful when you go up to ask people for the sponsorship money.
Absolutely.
So is there anything else, any last minute advice or a quote that you just absolutely love that you want to leave our audience with before we end?
Ooh, I say one of my favorite quotes is, okay, so a couple of things. So number one is, I know we talked today a lot about everything, and we probably, we touched a little bit on sponsorship, a little bit of business, a little bit of life. Like I said, if you want to know more about sponsorship, head over to sponsor101.com. Be sure to get that free e-course. But I also want to say that, what I do is because of my family. I was very blessed to have some amazingly strong men and women in my family, grandmothers and great-grandmothers who led us into strong work ethic and to being able to serve other people. And so Walt Disney has a quote that he says, "You can build, dream, and create the most magical place in the world, but it takes people to make the dream a reality." And so whether those people be, part of the veteran woman community, whether those people be the people at your church, whether it be your family, I invite you to take that quote and make sponsors be part of the way that you make your dream a reality, funding your dreams with other people's money for greater impact, influence, and income.
I love that. Love it. Love it. So again, how can we reach you? How can we get in touch with you?
Oh, yeah. So sponsor101.com, and also all social media platforms at Roberto Teaches. All
right. Too easy to remember. So make sure to go to sponsor101.com, get the free training from Roberto. Check him out on Facebook Live. There's some neat stuff coming in the future, so make sure to check all of those out. Also follow him and check out whenever he has live events. He also has the book Relationships Make Money, correct? Did I get the title right?
You're giving a little sneak peek. So the first book's called Relationships Raise Money, but the next book that will be out will be Relationships Make Money, but our book on sponsorship is Relationships Raise Money.
I don't know if I knew about that. Okay. A little premonition, huh?
Don't worry. We already got the domains.
So definitely check it out. And again, Roberto, I thank you for your service. I thank you for everything that you do. I thank you for helping people fund their dreams with other people's money.
You've been listening to the Veteran Woman Podcast. If you want to connect with Ariel and let her know what you thought of today's show, be sure to head over to www.theveteranwoman.com and follow her on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Veteran Woman.